At my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law demanded my apartment keys in front of 130 guests. When I refused, he slapped me so hard. I left and made a phone call. 30 minutes later, a woman appeared at the door of the hall, and when they saw who it was, they began to cry. I'm going to tell you something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My own daughter's wedding turned into the most humiliating, and ultimately satisfying, night of my life. But here's the thing, sometimes the people you love most are the ones capable of hurting you deepest. Sarah's wedding day started like a fairy tale. You know the kind, white dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage, flowers everywhere, guests streaming and wearing their best smiles and most expensive shoes. I've been planning this day with her for 2 years, ever since Marcus proposed with that ridiculous 3-carat ring that probably cost more than my car. Standing in the back of St. Michael's Cathedral, watching my little girl walk down the aisle, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. Pride, joy, heartbreak, all mixed together like ingredients in some emotional recipe I'd never quite mastered. 28 years old, Sarah looked radiant. More beautiful than her mother had been on our wedding day, though I'd never say that out loud. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Marcus said his vows with that smooth confidence I'd grown to recognize over the past 3 years, the kind that made people believe whatever came out of his mouth. Sarah beamed like she'd won the lottery. In her mind, maybe she had. But if you've ever been to a wedding where something felt just slightly off, you'll understand what I mean when I say the reception had an undercurrent. Like when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking just a beat too long. That kind of tension that makes your shoulders bunch up without you realizing it. The Riverside Manor reception hall was perfect, of course. Marcus's family had insisted on the best, which meant crystal chandeliers, linen tablecloths, and a catering bill that would have fed a small village for a month. 130 guests, all dressed to impress, all pretending this was the happiest day they'd ever witnessed. I was making small talk with my brother-in-law near the cake table when Marcus appeared at my elbow. He had that look, you know the one. Like he'd been waiting all day for the right moment to corner me. "David," he said, flashing that practiced smile. "We need to talk." The music was loud enough that nobody else could hear us, but something in his tone made me set down my champagne glass. "Sure, Marcus. What's on your mind?" He moved closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Alcohol, maybe, but not the celebratory kind. The liquid courage kind. "Sarah and I have been discussing our future," he began, his voice taking on that business meeting tone I'd heard him use with clients. "We've decided we want to start fresh. Build something together that's completely ours." I nodded, waiting for him to get to the point. Marcus never said anything directly when he could take the scenic route instead. "The thing is, we're going to need some help getting established. Young couples today face challenges our generation never had to deal with." There it was. The setup. I'd been expecting this conversation for months, ever since Sarah mentioned they were looking at houses in the expensive part of town. Houses that cost 3 times what Marcus made as a junior marketing executive. "What kind of help are we talking about?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. Marcus's smile got wider, but his eyes stayed calculating. "Well, you've got that beautiful apartment downtown. Prime location, great value. Sarah mentioned it's been in the family for 15 years. My apartment. The place I bought after Sarah's mother died, when I needed somewhere to start over. The place where I'd rebuilt my life one careful piece at a time. Where Sarah had spent weekends during her college years, where we'd had our best conversations, where I'd taught her to make her mother's lasagna recipe. It has been," I said carefully. "The thing is, we could really use that space. Sarah's always felt so comfortable there, and it would be perfect for us while we're getting our feet under us. You understand?" I stared at him. Around us, wedding guests laughed and danced and celebrated. The band was playing something jazzy and upbeat. Sarah was across the room, talking animatedly with her college friends, her face glowing with happiness. "You want me to give you my apartment?" "Not give," Marcus said quickly, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We'd work something out. Maybe you could find somewhere smaller, more appropriate for a single man your age. Something in the suburbs, you know? Quieter." The suburbs. Where old people went to wait for retirement and death. Where the grocery stores closed at 9 and the most exciting thing that happened was the weekly farmers market. "Marcus," I said slowly, "I'm 54 years old. I'm not exactly ready for a retirement community." His smile flickered, just for a second. "Of course not. But you have to think practically. Sarah's my wife now, and we need to build our life together. Family helps family, right?" There was something in the way he said my wife that made my jaw clench. Like Sarah had been transferred from my ownership to his, and now he got to make decisions about what was best for everyone involved. "Have you talked to Sarah about this?" "She's completely on board," Marcus said, and I caught something in his voice that made me look closer. A hint of smugness, maybe. Or satisfaction. She understands that marriage means making sacrifices. Putting your spouse first. The music seemed to get louder. Or maybe it was just the sound of blood rushing in my ears. I looked across the room at Sarah, who was still laughing with her friends, completely oblivious to the conversation happening 20 feet away. I need to think about this, I said finally. Marcus's expression darkened. Not much, but enough that I noticed. There's not much to think about, David. Sarah's made her choice. She's chosen her future with me. You can either be part of that future or you can be an obstacle to it. An obstacle. Like I was some annoying speed bump in their path to happiness instead of the man who'd raised Sarah single-handedly after her mother died. The man who'd worked double shifts to pay for her college, who'd taught her to drive, who'd walked her down the aisle just 3 hours earlier. I said I need to think about it. Marcus leaned closer, and now I could definitely smell the alcohol on his breath. Don't take too long. Sarah's already picking out paint colors. He walked away before I could respond, melting back into the crowd of wedding guests like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just tried to manipulate me into handing over the most important thing I owned. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just occurred. Around me, people danced and laughed and toasted the happy couple. The cake hadn't even been cut yet. I needed air. I needed space to think. I headed toward the hallway that led to the restrooms, hoping to find a quiet corner where I could collect my thoughts. That's when I heard Sarah's voice coming from around the corner. Told you it would be easy. He never says no to me. I stopped walking. Sarah was talking to someone just out of sight, her voice carrying that excited, conspiratorial tone she'd used as a teenager when she was planning something she knew I wouldn't approve of. Are you sure he'll go for it? Another voice. Female, unfamiliar. Please. He's been feeling guilty about Mom dying for 15 years. He'll do whatever I ask if he thinks it'll make me happy. Besides, Marcus already softened him up. My chest felt tight. I pressed myself against the wall, knowing I shouldn't be listening but unable to stop. What if he says no? Sarah laughed, and there was something in that sound that I'd never heard before. Something cold. He won't. And if he does, Marcus has a backup plan. We'll just make things uncomfortable until he changes his mind. Trust me, I know how to handle my father. Handle me. Like I was a difficult client or a stubborn child instead of the person who'd sacrificed everything to give her the best life possible. Won't he be hurt when he finds out about the house? He'll get over it. Besides, it's not like he'll be homeless. He can find somewhere else to live. Somewhere more appropriate. There was that phrase again. More appropriate. Like my life, my choices, my home were somehow beneath their standards. I just feel bad lying to him. It's not lying, Sarah said, and I could hear the edge creeping into her voice. It's managing the situation. He's too emotional to think clearly about this stuff. Someone has to make the practical decisions. I'd heard enough. More than enough. I backed away from the corner and walked toward the main reception hall, my head spinning. The daughter I'd raised, the girl I devoted my life to, had been discussing me like I was some kind of problem to be solved. But here's the thing that really got to me, she was right. I probably would have said yes if they'd asked nicely. If they'd sat me down and explained their situation, talked to me like an adult instead of trying to manipulate me like a mark in some con game. Now, though? Now I was angry. I made it back to the reception hall just as the band announced it was time for the cake cutting. Everyone gathered around the elaborate 3-tier creation that had cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. Sarah and Marcus posed for pictures, feeding each other small bites while the photographer captured every moment for posterity. Sarah caught my eye across the crowd and smiled, that same bright, innocent expression she'd worn when she was 7 years old and had just convinced me to let her stay up past her bedtime. Except now I knew what was behind that smile. The dancing resumed after the cake ceremony. I watched from the sidelines, nursing a whiskey and trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to confront Sarah immediately, to demand an explanation for what I'd overheard. Another part wanted to leave quietly and pretend this night had never happened. But as I watched Marcus work the crowd, slapping backs, shaking hands, playing the role of the perfect new husband, I realized something important. This wasn't just about my apartment. This was about power. About control. About making sure I understood my new place in Sarah's life. And that's when Marcus made his first mistake. He'd been drinking steadily since the ceremony, I'd noticed. Not enough to be obviously drunk, but enough to make him bolder. Louder. More confident in his ability to get what he wanted. He approached me again around 10 o'clock, just as the evening was winding down. Some of the older guests had already started to leave, and the dance floor was populated mostly by Sarah's college friends and Marcus's work colleagues. David, he said, gripping my shoulder just a little too tightly. Have you given any more thought to our conversation? I set down my drink and looked at him. Really looked at him. Marcus was handsome, I'd give him that. The kind of guy who'd probably never been told no about anything important in his entire privileged life. Tall, well-dressed, confident in that way that comes from always having things go your way. I said. And? I've decided I'm not interested. His grip on my shoulder tightened. What do you mean, not interested? I mean I'm keeping my apartment. You and Sarah will need to find another way to get established. The smile disappeared from Marcus's face like someone had flipped a switch. You're making a mistake, David. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Marcus glanced around, making sure nobody was close enough to overhear us. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. You don't understand. Sarah wants this. She's counting on it. Are you really going to disappoint your daughter on her wedding day? Sarah's a grown woman. She'll figure it out. No, Marcus said, his voice getting harder. She won't. Because you're going to give us those keys. Tonight. I stared at him. Excuse me? You heard me. Sarah packed a bag for the honeymoon, but she also packed a bag for the apartment. She's expecting to pick up those keys before we leave for the airport tomorrow. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just been planning to ask for my apartment, they'd been planning to take it. Like it was already theirs, like my opinion was just a formality. Over my dead body, I said quietly. Marcus's face flushed red. You selfish old man. Do you have any idea what you're doing to your daughter? What you're doing to her marriage? I'm teaching her that actions have consequences. Something you apparently never learned. That's when Marcus made his second mistake. The big one. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep hard enough to leave bruises. Listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice shaking with anger. You're going to give me those keys. Right now. In front of everyone. And you're going to smile while you do it, because if you don't, I'm going to make sure Sarah knows exactly what kind of father she really has. Let go of me. Not until we have an understanding. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. Marcus. Let go of me now. Instead, he squeezed harder. The keys, David. And that's when everything went sideways. Marcus raised his voice just enough that people started to notice. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, his voice carrying across the reception hall. I'd like to make an announcement. The band stopped playing. Conversations died. 130 guests turned to look at us, including Sarah, who was standing near the head table with a confused expression on her face. My new father-in-law has a wedding gift for us, Marcus continued, his grip still tight on my arm. Don't you, David? I could feel every eye in the room on me. Sarah was walking toward us now, her white dress rustling against the polished floor. Honey, she said, her voice uncertain. What's going on? Your father is about to give us the keys to his apartment, Marcus announced, his voice getting louder. As a wedding present. Isn't that generous? Sarah's face went pale. She looked at Marcus, then at me, then back at Marcus again. I could see her trying to figure out how this had gotten so public so quickly. Marcus, she said quietly. Maybe we should. No, he interrupted. This is perfect. Everyone should witness this moment. David? He squeezed my arm again, hard enough that I winced. Around us, guests whispered to each other, clearly sensing that something was wrong but not understanding what. I'm not giving you anything, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. Marcus's face went from red to purple. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, everyone here is going to know what kind of man you really are. What kind of man is that? The kind who puts his own selfishness ahead of his daughter's happiness. The kind who can't let go. The kind who... Marcus, stop, Sarah said, reaching for his free arm. Please, let's just... stay out of this, he snapped at her, and I saw Sarah flinch like he'd slapped her. That's when I knew I was looking at the real Marcus. Not the charming, confident man who'd courted my daughter for 3 years. Not the smooth talker who'd convinced her to marry him. This was who he really was underneath all that polish, someone who thought he could intimidate and manipulate his way to whatever he wanted. Let go of my arm, I said one more time. Give me the keys. No. And that's when Marcus made his final, fatal mistake. He let go of my arm and slapped me across the face. Hard. Hard enough that the sound echoed through the reception hall like a gunshot. Hard enough that my cheek burned and my eyes watered. Hard enough that every single person in that room gasped in shock. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Then Sarah screamed. Not a scream of anger or outrage, a scream of horror. Like she'd just watched her new husband commit murder in front of 130 witnesses. Marcus, she cried, rushing toward me. Oh my God, Dad, are you okay? But I wasn't looking at Sarah. I was looking at Marcus, who seemed to be realizing for the first time what he'd just done. The color had drained from his face, and he was staring at his hand like it belonged to someone else. David, he started to say. Don't, I said, holding up my hand. Don't say another word. I looked around the room at all those shocked faces. Sarah's college friends with their mouths hanging open. Marcus's work colleagues trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed their golden boy assault an old man. The elderly relatives who'd probably never seen anything like this outside of a soap opera. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice calm despite the fact that my hands were shaking with rage. Thank you for coming to celebrate my daughter's wedding. I hope you all have a safe drive home. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind the whispers and shocked murmurs and Sarah calling my name. I didn't look back. I couldn't. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 5 minutes with the engine running, waiting for my hands to stop shaking enough that I could drive safely. My cheek still burned where Marcus had hit me, and I could see in the rearview mirror that it was already starting to swell. But here's the thing, I wasn't just angry. I was hurt. Deeply, profoundly hurt in a way I hadn't felt since Sarah's mother died. Because this wasn't just about Marcus being an entitled piece of work. This was about my daughter choosing him. Choosing his version of events over mine. Choosing to participate in a scheme to manipulate me out of my home. That's when I remembered something. A conversation I'd had 6 months earlier with my lawyer, Janet Morrison, when I'd been updating my will. She'd mentioned something about Marcus's first marriage, something she'd discovered during the routine background check she ran on anyone who might inherit from my estate. I pulled out my phone and dialed Janet's number. It was almost 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, but Janet was the kind of lawyer who answered her phone 24/7 for clients who'd been with her as long as I had. David? She answered on the second ring. Is everything okay? Janet, I need you to tell me everything you know about Marcus Webb's first marriage. There was a pause. David, it's Sarah's wedding night. Are you sure you want to? I'm sure. Tell me. Another pause, longer this time. Where are you calling from? The parking lot of the Riverside Manor. And before you ask, yes, something happened. Marcus just slapped me in front of 130 wedding guests. Jesus Christ. Are you hurt? My pride more than anything else. But I need to know about his first marriage. Now. I heard Janet sigh, then the sound of her moving around, probably getting her laptop. Okay. But David, this information was privileged. I only looked into it because of the will situation. I understand. Tell me. Marcus was married before, from 2019 to 2022. Her name was Jessica Webb, well, Jessica Martinez now. She filed for divorce in early 2022 citing emotional and financial abuse. My chest felt tight again, but for a different reason this time. What kind of abuse? According to the filing, Marcus had been systematically isolating her from her family and friends. He convinced her to quit her job, move away from her support system, and become financially dependent on him. When she tried to leave, he threatened to ruin her professionally and personally. I closed my eyes. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. There's more, Janet continued. Jessica's family owned a small restaurant in Portland. During the marriage, Marcus convinced her to get them to co-sign on a business loan for some investment opportunity he was pursuing. When the investment went bad, the family lost the restaurant. Did he use the same playbook with Jessica that he's using with Sarah? It sounds like it. Charm offensive, followed by isolation, followed by financial manipulation. The difference is that Jessica's family saw through it eventually and helped her get out. I thought about Sarah's college friends, how I hadn't seen them around much in the past year. About her job at the nonprofit, which she'd left 6 months ago to focus on wedding planning. About how she'd been spending more and more time at Marcus's place and less time at mine. Janet, I said slowly, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to call Jessica Martinez. Tonight. I need to talk to her. David, I can't just. Please. I think Sarah's in trouble, and I think Jessica might be the only person who can help her understand what's happening. There was a long silence. Finally, Janet sighed again. Give me 20 minutes. I'll call you back. I sat in that parking lot for exactly 21 minutes, watching guests trickle out of the reception hall. Some of them looked at my car as they passed, probably wondering if I was okay. A few even approached, but I pretended to be on the phone until they went away. When Janet called back, she had Jessica Martinez on a three-way call. Mr. Morrison? Jessica's voice was soft, nervous. Janet explained what happened. I'm so sorry. Thank you. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Marcus ever hit you? No, Jessica said quickly. He never got physical. He was too smart for that. But he did other things. Made me question my own memory, my own judgment. Made me think that everyone who tried to warn me about him was just jealous or didn't understand our relationship. What made you finally leave? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. My sister. She showed up at our apartment one day unannounced and saw how I was living. How isolated I'd become. How afraid I was to make any decisions without checking with Marcus first. She literally packed my bags while I cried and told her I couldn't leave because I loved him too much. I thought about Sarah's expression when Marcus had snapped at her to stay out of it. That flinch. That moment of fear. Jessica, I said, would you be willing to come to the wedding reception? To talk to Sarah? Tonight? Tonight. I think she needs to hear your story. From someone who's been exactly where she is right now. There was another long pause. Mr. Morrison, if I do this, Marcus is going to be furious. He's going to try to convince Sarah that I'm lying, that I'm just a vindictive ex-wife trying to ruin his happiness. Let me worry about Marcus. Where's the reception? Riverside Manor, 1247 Oak Street. How long will it take you to get here? I'm in Portland, so. Maybe 30 minutes? We'll be here. I hung up and sat back in my car seat, my mind racing. 30 minutes to figure out how to handle this. 30 minutes to decide whether I was doing the right thing or making everything worse. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flinch when Marcus snapped at Sarah. I heard her voice in that hallway, talking about managing me like I was some kind of problem. I felt the sting of his hand across my face. Marcus had made this personal the moment he decided I was just an obstacle to be removed. Now it was time for him to learn that obstacles sometimes fight back. I walked back into the reception hall 25 minutes later. The party was winding down, but there were still about 60 people left. The lights had been dimmed, and the band was playing slow songs for the few couples still dancing. Marcus and Sarah were at the head table, surrounded by his groomsmen. Marcus was holding court, probably spinning some story about how I'd overreacted or misunderstood the situation. Sarah looked miserable, her makeup smeared and her perfect wedding hair falling out of its elaborate arrangement. She saw me first and jumped up from her chair. Dad. Thank God you came back. Are you okay? I'm so sorry about what happened. We need to talk, I said, cutting her off. All of us. Marcus stood up slowly, his face wary. David, look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made him actually do it. In 5 minutes, someone is going to walk through that door. When she does, you're going to listen to what she has to say. Both of you. Who? Sarah asked. Someone who knows Marcus better than you do. Marcus's face went white. Actually white, like all the blood had drained out of it. You called Jessica. I did. You had no right. I had every right. You made it my business the moment you decided to try to manipulate my daughter into giving you my apartment. Sarah looked back and forth between us, confusion clear on her face. Who's Jessica? Marcus started to stand up again. Sarah, we're leaving. Right now. No, I said, and this time I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You're going to sit down and you're going to listen. Because if you try to leave, I'm going to tell everyone in this room about your first marriage. About Jessica's family's restaurant. About the pattern of behavior that anyone with half a brain can see you're repeating with my daughter. Marcus sat back down, but his hands were clenched into fists on the table. You're making a huge mistake, David. You're going to ruin Sarah's happiness over some misguided. He stopped talking when the door opened. Jessica Martinez was smaller than I'd expected. Petite, dark-haired, wearing jeans and a simple blouse like she'd thrown on the first clothes she could find. She looked nervous but determined, like someone who'd made a difficult decision and was going to see it through. The remaining wedding guests turned to look at her, curious about this late arrival. But Marcus and Sarah only had eyes for each other, Marcus with growing panic, Sarah with dawning realization. Hello, Marcus, Jessica said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. Sarah turned to stare at her new husband. Marcus? Who is this? Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Finally, he managed to croak out, Sarah, this is Jessica. My ex-wife. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She actually took a step backward, her hand flying to her mouth. You're what? I can explain. You told me you'd never been married before. Sarah's voice was getting louder, causing more guests to turn and stare. You told me I was your first wife. Jessica walked closer to the head table, her expression sympathetic but resolute. Sarah? I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances. But your father called me tonight because he's worried about you. And after what he told me about what happened here, I think you need to hear my story. We're leaving, Marcus said, standing up and grabbing Sarah's arm. Right now. But Sarah shook him off. Don't touch me. She looked at Jessica with a mixture of curiosity and horror. What story? Jessica glanced at me, and I nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and began to speak. I met Marcus 4 years ago. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted in a man. He swept me off my feet, just like I'm sure he swept you off yours. Sarah said nothing, but I could see her processing Jessica's words. At first, everything was perfect. He made me feel like the most important person in the world. But gradually, things started to change. He began criticizing my friends, saying they were jealous of our relationship. He convinced me that my family didn't understand what we had together. Marcus was staring at Jessica with undisguised hatred. You're lying. You're just. Am I lying about your business loan, Marcus? The one that cost my family their restaurant? Sarah turned to look at her husband. What business loan? Jessica continued, her voice steady despite the tears starting to form in her eyes. He convinced me to get my parents to co-sign on a loan for some investment opportunity. $50,000. When it fell through, they lost their restaurant. The place they'd spent 20 years building. That's not what happened, Marcus said desperately. The market conditions changed. Nobody could have predicted. What about convincing me to quit my job? To move away from Portland so we could start fresh somewhere without all my negative influences? Sarah was staring at Marcus like she was seeing him for the first time. You made her quit her job? It was her choice. Just like it was my choice to leave the nonprofit? Sarah's voice was getting sharper. Just like it was my choice to stop seeing my college friends because they didn't understand our relationship? The reception hall had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this drama unfold like it was dinner theater, except nobody was eating popcorn and the stakes were real. Jessica looked directly at Sarah. Has he started talking about your father's apartment yet? About how you deserve it more than he does? About how your father is being selfish by not helping you get established? Sarah's face crumpled. Oh my God. Sarah, Marcus said, reaching for her again. You can't listen to this. She's just trying to ruin what we have. She never got over me leaving her. I left you, Jessica said firmly. I left you when I finally realized what you were doing to me. What you were doing to my family. And if Sarah's smart, she'll leave you too. Marcus's careful facade finally cracked completely. You vindictive. He lunged toward Jessica, but I stepped between them, catching him by the shoulders. Don't even think about it. This is all your fault, Marcus snarled at me. You couldn't just mind your own business. You couldn't just give us what we needed. Now you've ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, I said calmly. I just turned on the lights. Sarah was crying now, great gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Her perfect wedding dress was wrinkled, her makeup was completely ruined, and she looked like her entire world had just collapsed. Which, I suppose, it had. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice becoming pleading. Honey, please. Don't listen to them. They don't understand what we have. What we're building together. But Sarah wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and realization. Dad, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I walked over and put my arms around my daughter, holding her while she cried. Over her shoulder, I could see Marcus standing there like a man watching his house burn down, realizing for the first time that he didn't have insurance. Jessica approached us carefully. Sarah? I know this is overwhelming. But you need to know, it doesn't get better. It only gets worse. The isolation, the manipulation, the way he makes you question your own judgment. It just gets worse. Sarah pulled back from me to look at Jessica. How did you find the strength to leave? My sister. She refused to give up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. Just like your father refused to give up on you tonight. Sarah turned to look at Marcus, who was still standing there with his mouth open like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Is it true? About Jessica's family's restaurant? Marcus's jaw worked like he was trying to find the right words, the right explanation that would make everything okay again. But for once in his life, his smooth talking had abandoned him. Sarah, you have to understand. Is it true? It's complicated. It's not complicated, Jessica said. It's simple. He used my family's trust to fund his own dreams, and when those dreams failed, he walked away and left them to deal with the consequences. Just like he'll do to you when something better comes along. Sarah closed her eyes, and I could see her replaying the last few years of her relationship with Marcus. Seeing all the red flags she'd missed or ignored. Understanding how carefully he'd isolated her from everyone who might have warned her. When she opened her eyes again, she was looking at Marcus with an expression I'd never seen before. Not love, not anger, just cold, clear recognition of who he really was. The marriage is over, she said quietly. Sarah, no. It's over, Marcus. Whatever this was, whatever I thought it was, it's over. Marcus looked around the reception hall at all the witnesses to his humiliation. His groomsmen were avoiding eye contact. His family members were whispering to each other with shocked expressions. The few remaining guests were pretending not to stare while obviously hanging on every word. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said to Sarah, but his voice lacked conviction now. He sounded like a man who knew he'd already lost. "No," Sarah said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "The biggest mistake of my life was saying yes when you proposed." Marcus turned to glare at me one last time. "You think you've won something here, old man? You think you've saved her? All you've done is guarantee that she'll end up alone and miserable, just like you." "Maybe," I said calmly. "But at least she'll end up free." Marcus stormed out of the reception hall, leaving behind his new wife, his wedding guests, and the ruins of whatever future he'd imagined for himself. A few of his groomsmen followed him, but most people just stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Sarah slumped into a chair, looking exhausted. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, sitting down beside her, "you take some time to figure out what you want your life to look like. Without anyone else making those decisions for you." Jessica approached us hesitantly. "Sarah? I know this is probably the last thing you want to think about right now, but you should talk to a lawyer as soon as possible. About an annulment, I mean. Given that he lied about his previous marriage, you might have grounds." Sarah nodded numbly. "I don't even know where to start." "I do," I said, pulling out my phone. "Janet Morrison is the best family lawyer in the state. She's already familiar with Marcus's history." As I made the call, I watched Sarah and Jessica talking quietly. Two women who'd never met before tonight, brought together by one man's pattern of manipulation and deceit. There was something powerful about watching Sarah realize she wasn't alone, that someone else had walked this same dark path and found her way out. The remaining wedding guests began to disperse, some stopping to offer Sarah awkward condolences, others simply slipping away into the night. Within an hour, the reception hall was nearly empty except for us, the catering staff, and the lingering smell of expensive flowers and broken dreams. "Dad?" Sarah said as we prepared to leave. She was still wearing her wedding dress, though it was wrinkled and stained with tears now. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why didn't you just give him the keys? It would have been easier." I thought about that for a moment, watching the caterer stack chairs and fold tables. Because easy isn't always right. And because someone needed to love you enough to say no. Sarah started crying again, but this time it was different. Not the helpless sobbing of someone whose world had collapsed, but the cleansing tears of someone who was finally free to grieve what she'd lost and grateful for what she'd been saved from. 3 months later, I got a call from Jessica. She and Sarah had become close friends, bonding over their shared experience and helping each other heal. Sarah's annulment had gone through without any complications. Turns out that lying about previous marriages is taken pretty seriously by family court judges. "How's she doing?" I asked. "Better. She started therapy, got her job back at the nonprofit. She's even thinking about going back to school for her master's degree." "And Marcus?" Jessica's laugh was sharp but not bitter. "Last I heard, he was dating some 22-year-old he met at a coffee shop. Her father owns a chain of restaurants." I wasn't surprised. Men like Marcus don't learn from their mistakes, they just find new victims and refine their techniques. But here's the thing that still amazes me, Sarah did learn. She learned that love isn't supposed to make you smaller, that the right person doesn't try to isolate you from everyone who cares about you, that marriage should be a partnership between equals, not a hostile takeover. Most importantly, she learned that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who refuse to give you what you think you want. The apartment? I still live there. Sarah comes by for dinner every Sunday, and we cook her mother's lasagna recipe together. She's dating someone new now, a teacher named Mike who encourages her friendships, supports her career goals, and thinks my apartment is really cool but has never once suggested I should give it to anyone. Sometimes I think about that moment at the wedding when Marcus demanded my keys in front of 130 people. How different things might have been if I'd just handed them over. Sarah would probably still be married to him, slowly losing pieces of herself until there was nothing left but an empty shell wearing her face. Instead, she's free. She's strong. She's herself again. And Marcus? Well, Marcus learned something too, though I doubt he appreciated the lesson. He learned that some obstacles don't move when you push them, they push back. The funny thing is, I never did get an apology from him. Not for the slap, not for the manipulation attempt, not for trying to steal my home. But I'm okay with that. Men like Marcus don't apologize because they don't think they've done anything wrong. In their minds, they're always the victim, always the one being treated unfairly by people who just don't understand their vision. But sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a sense of justice. Sometimes the manipulator gets manipulated by his own arrogance. Sometimes the con man gets conned by his own confidence. And sometimes, when a grown man slaps his father-in-law at his own wedding reception, He discovers that actions really do have consequences. Sarah still has the wedding dress. She keeps it in her closet as a reminder, she says, of how close she came to making the biggest mistake of her life. She jokes that she might wear it to her next wedding, if she ever gets married again, as a symbol of second chances and hard-won wisdom. I hope she does get married again someday, to someone who deserves her. Someone who sees her strength instead of trying to undermine it. Someone who wants to build a life with her instead of using her to build a life for himself. But if she doesn't, that's okay too. Because she's learned the most important lesson of all, she doesn't need anyone else to complete her. She's whole on her own. As for me, I learned something too that night. I learned that sometimes being a good parent means being willing to be the bad guy. Sometimes it means saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. Sometimes it means making a phone call that will hurt your child in the short term to save them from much worse pain in the long term. I learned that love isn't always gentle. Sometimes love has to be fierce. Sometimes love has to fight. And sometimes, when someone slaps you at your daughter's wedding, the best revenge isn't hitting back, it's making sure they understand exactly who they've chosen to mess with. I'm not a rich man. I'm not a powerful man in any traditional sense. But I'm a father who loves his daughter enough to protect her from her own worst decisions. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing in the world. The morning after the wedding, as I sat in my apartment drinking coffee and nursing a bruised cheek, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, there was just one word: thanks. It was from Jessica. I texted back, "Thank you for coming." Her response came a few minutes later: "Thank you for calling. Not many fathers would have had the courage to do what you did." But that's where she was wrong. Any father worth the name would have done exactly what I did. The tragedy is how many fathers, how many families, never get the chance to fight back because they don't see the danger until it's too late. I was lucky. I overheard a conversation that opened my eyes. I had a lawyer who'd done her homework. I had the resources to make a phone call that changed everything. Not everyone is that fortunate. But maybe that's why I'm telling you this story. Maybe someone reading this will recognize the signs I almost missed. Maybe someone will remember Jessica's words about isolation and manipulation and financial control. Maybe someone will have the courage to make their own difficult phone call when the time comes. Because here's the truth that Marcus never understood: real love doesn't require surrender. Real love doesn't demand that you make yourself smaller to make someone else feel bigger. Real love doesn't ask you to choose between your family and your spouse. Real love builds bridges. It doesn't burn them. And if someone in your life is asking you to burn bridges, to give up your independence, your relationships, your sense of self, then what they're offering isn't love at all. It's just a very pretty cage. The scar on my cheek faded after a few weeks, but I kept the lesson that came with it. Sometimes getting hurt is the price you pay for protecting the people you love. And sometimes, that's a price worth paying. 3 years later, when Sarah walked across the stage to accept her master's degree in social work, I was sitting in the front row cheering louder than anyone else in the auditorium. She's working with survivors of domestic abuse now, helping them recognize the patterns and find the strength to break free. She says I taught her that love sometimes has to be tough. But she taught me something too. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing even when you're terrified of the consequences. Marcus taught us both something as well, though I doubt he meant to. He taught us that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a handsome young man in an expensive suit who says all the right words and knows exactly how to make you feel special. Until the moment when you're no longer useful to him. Until the moment when he shows you who he really is. And in that moment, you have a choice: you can pretend you didn't see it, or you can act on what you know. I chose to act. Sarah chose to listen. Jessica chose to help. And Marcus? Marcus chose to reveal himself at exactly the wrong moment, in front of exactly the wrong people, to exactly the wrong father. Sometimes justice isn't something that happens to you. Sometimes it's something you make happen, one difficult decision at a time. Sometimes it's as simple as refusing to hand over your keys. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change everything.